Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Gamma's Boards and Bits. My name is David Abelson. I'm the Gamma Education Manager, and I'm here today with Jeff Tidball. Jeff Tidball is a veteran game publisher, producer, designer, and writer. He recently shuttered his Left Justified consulting and publishing company to take a role as head of studio at Chip Theory Games. Jeff has more than 25 years of game industry working, freelancing, and consulting experience with more than 30 game companies, ranging from Alderac to Z-Man. He earned an MFA in screenwriting from the USC School of Cinematic Arts for good measure. He's here to talk to us today about how to build a better dashboard. Everyone, please welcome Jeff Tidball. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, David, thank you so much. I appreciate being here. This is perversely the kind of thing that I love to talk about.
Well, I'm excited to hear about it. I'm going to jump off the screen and let you get started.
Awesome. Thank you, David.
Mhm.
So the idea for this presentation kind of came about after some consulting work that I did for a client over the last year where we had some detailed questions
Mhm.
and know what was going on. And so um, sorted that out. And I wanted to kind of show you how you could do it for your business. So here is the kind of starting situation. Are we seeing slides or are we just me right now? Yes. So I would love for you to imagine yourself here on this tropical island. You're a high-powered game publishing executive. This is your morning, noon, and night view. The weather's fantastic. There's just enough wind. There are seagulls around. Somebody brings you a drink and a snack and a little scrap of paper. You look at the scrap of paper and it's got six different numbers on it. And you read the numbers and you smile and you go back to your drink. So I want you to put a pin in that feeling, and we're going to come back to it because that's sort of the goal with this situation. All right. So the next thing I need you to do is find a piece of paper or open a text window or whatever and write down for yourself a couple of actual questions or concerns or things that you worry about on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, kind of about your business. And feel free if you want to drop some of those into the chat there. Um, for example, lots of people worry, are you going to release your next game on time? Is that going to come out? Is all of this work going to go somewhere? Um, what do our Amazon sales need to be next week if we're going to make payroll? Uh, is my developer doing their job at all? Or are they just riding their bike around town and not doing anything? How far behind am I? Can I afford to make a new hire? How long is my inventory going to last? How many previews should I commission for my next crowdfunding campaign? Just one or like 12, or what on earth should I do? How big a booth should I get at Origins? Like all kinds of stuff like that. So I really do encourage you to kind of make a list for yourself about some questions and concerns that you would benefit from having more insight into every week. All right, put a pin in that list of questions. Uh, Now I have a question for you, and the question seems ridiculous at first. I'm curious if you know how many piano tuners there are in Chicago. And obviously you do not, because that is an insane thing to know. But what this is a question that gives us some insight into how we can learn things that we do not know anything about. So, first of all, to start, I would love it. No Googling, no GPTing. Drop into the comments if you'd like your best estimate for how many piano tuners there are in Chicago. I'll give you a second to think about two piano tuners. There are not very many pianos left. That's true. The sort of point of this exercise is that it is possible to estimate things that you have no business knowing or that are literally unknowable. And there are a couple of keys to this. Um, and we'll get to sort of why this is relevant. But the couple of keys to this are that you always want to estimate unknowable things in ranges. And so it's very reasonable to want to estimate an exact number of things, but in order to get um, useful information out of this, you're going to want to say, like, it's between 1 and 100, or it's between 5 and 20, or whatever, however wide you need that range to be, so that you can be 90% sure that that is true. So if it's something that you have hardly any knowledge about, you will have to estimate more widely. I'm going to leave David to jump in on the audio. Yeah, I'm going to leave the technical folks over at Gamma to chime in on that. Okay, I'm just going to keep talking. Um, the wider you have to go in order to get to 90% certainty, the more useful that's going to be. If you are going to try to guess very narrow about something that you actually don't have anything that you know about it, that estimate is not going to be particularly useful. So here's the sort of oh, whoops, I'm just way beyond my slides. I've already talked about all this stuff. Here are some things that you might not have any business knowing, but that you could make estimates about. So this is probably worthwhile. I mean, drop them in the chat or not. Write them on your piece of paper. It's useful to actually write these down or think about them. But like, how many party game SKUs do you suppose there are in the ACD catalog? This is probably relevant to you if you are releasing a party game. Like that number is knowable. Somebody at ACD probably knows the answer to that question. But if you're thinking about whether to release a party game, that's very relevant. How fast can Mike Merles write 2,500 words of D&D stuff? It is, if you are a person who has hired Mike Merles to do that, that is of critical importance to you as to how fast that thing is going to come out. How much does it cost to print a sheet of punchboard with specific specs? That might be very useful to you if you're just trying to spitball the initial information about a game that you are thinking about putting together, but you don't want to wait a week in order to get a quote back. How much is your Gen Con hotel room going to cost? That's probably one where lots of folks who have been there before can get to a very narrow range of potential costs, as opposed to guessing that it's going to be between $30 and $3,000. Obviously, you can get more narrow than that. So the point of all this is that you can come to fruitful estimates about lots of different pieces of information that it is very, very difficult to know with complete precision. All right, back to the desert island. The point of thinking about and estimating those things is that the more things you know concretely, the less you will have to worry about them. Tons and tons of people's stress comes from things that they don't know. And so that is also the point of this entire kind of dashboard exercise is you're going to take a bunch of information and put it in a place where you can refer to it. And that is going to help you not be freaking out all the time about there's plenty of completely reasonable things to freak out about as you're attempting to run your game business. But things that you can know and learn and put in front of you should not be one of them. So that's the entire point of this kind of dashboarding exercise is to actually know things and get rid of your worry. So like coming up with 3 to 12 metrics is about the right number, in my opinion. This last time we did this exercise with a client of mine, we wound up coming up with 6, although one of them was a 4-part metric and one of them was a 2-part metric. So for example, we had a metric about how recently have we talked to every one of our clients, because it was a client facing business. And so the answers could be within a week, within 2 weeks, within a month, and longer than a month. So that was a 4-part answer, but really it's kind of one metric. So what if you had those numbers that could tell you everything you needed to know? And so you could sit on that tropical island, and as long as somebody brings you those numbers, you can look at those on a piece of paper and know that your business is in good shape and go back to drinking whatever it is that you're drinking. In my case, this is probably martinis, but maybe for you, it's margaritas or Mai Tais, or, well, I'm not the boss of you. You drink what you want. Um, so some things that you might put into a game company relevant dashboard Right? How many of your game development milestones are overdue? If the answer is zero, well, you are on your desert island. You don't really need to be worrying about that because all of your managers are um, keeping things moving forward. Um, how many weeks of inventory do you have on hand? As long as that number is larger than how long it takes you to order more, you are probably in good shape. How much cash do you have on hand? Maybe it's even better than cash on hand to do cash on hand divided by burn rate to know when you are going to run out of money. Back to Stefan's earlier question about cash flow being a key thing that he is worried about. I'm worried about cash flow as well. No joke. The trailing 4 weeks of your sales to distribution, maybe probably looking at last week's number is not necessarily all that useful. But if you start to get a sense of where it's going or where it's been at over a longer term, this is your dashboard. So you're going to decide what is relevant to you. But so these are just some examples of things that you might put into a game company dashboard that are all probably correct for somebody's business. It really, I want to say it again because I think this is really important. These should be the metrics that are like devastatingly relevant to your own business rather than to somebody else's. Here is the inverse version of that. The dashboard that QuickBooks shows you is garbage. That is what somebody else thinks that you should know about your business. And not only is it what somebody else thinks you should know about your business, it's optimized to be pretty instead of useful. And it's optimized to serve the interests of a company that is most interested in loaning you money rather than helping you understand what's going on and optimize your business. Obviously, I am not a huge Intuit fan, but the I guess the point of that is that it's really important for you to decide what's important, write that down, and then figure out how you can report to yourself on that in order to dispel your worry. This is kind of the right when people talk to you about working on your business instead of in your business, the question of figuring out what these metrics are is like kind of essence of on your business rather than in your business. All right. There are some kind of tricks that you can use to measure things that you don't have any business knowing because you're going to want to try to measure things that it's very hard to know. 5 strategies. First one is to just consider reasons that you should maybe be confident in your estimate and 2 reasons that you might be overconfident. This is going to tend, like if you're at we go back to the piano tuner question, right? If your answer to that is 30, are there any reasons that you think that 30 is right? Are there some reasons that you might be overconfident? Do you have any ideas about pianos generally? Have you been a piano tuner? Anyway, 2 reasons pro, 2 reasons con can help you zone in on that. This next one is one that I think is very, very helpful. What lots of people do when they are estimating in a range is instead of estimating to a range, they pick what they think the exact answer is, and then they add buffer on either side. So according to the bad strategy, you'd be like, yeah, I think there's probably 50 piano tuners in Chicago, and so probably it's between 25 and 75. That's kind of defeating the purpose of doing this in ranges. So to take the good version of that, you want to split it into 2 different questions. What is what I think the smallest number of piano tuners is, and what do I think the largest number of piano tuners is? I'm 95% certain that it is above 6, and I'm 95% certain it's below 500, then that is my 90% certainty window. Now, the next one kind of goes along with that, where you can think about those 2 numbers independently and then move wide to narrow until the numbers are not absurd. So in Chicago, surely there is at least one piano tuner, right? That just has to be true. And surely there are less than 15 million piano tuners because that is more or less the population of Chicago. And you can just keep walking those towards each other until you get to something that is not flat absurd and get to a good 90% certainty window that way. Another way to do is to just play a mental game to yourself. Um, if you could win $1,000, would you prefer your estimate or would you prefer to roll a 10-sided die and win $1,000 on a 1 to 9? If you're properly calibrated to that 90% window, you should not have any kind of a preference between those two things because they both have a 90% chance of coming true. So sometimes that little thought experiment can suggest like that you are too narrow. If you would much rather roll the die, your estimate needs to be wider. The last thing, and this is very helpful in a dashboard context, is to keep track of your estimates and then compare future estimates to past ones so you get a sense of what circumstances lead you to be wrong and then correct for those in the future. So this repetition and feedback is very, very good at this kind of thing. All right. So you were promised that we would actually make a dashboard or at least talk about how to make one of those. So here we go on that. Um, my suggestion is that you're going to come up with like 3 to 12 metrics of things that you actually want to track. I absolutely encourage you to keep a list next to you in a window on a paper. Drop them in the chat for all I care. That's great to see what everybody else is working on. But so for each one of the metrics that you are tracking, every week you're going to find out what is that actual number or range of numbers. If it's something like your revenue, you can get that to an actual number. You probably don't have to estimate that, but it might be a range of numbers if it is something that you are estimating. So for example, at one client, we were at one point very concerned about whether we had enough paying work over time to kind of keep the lights on far into the future, or whether we needed to get really, really serious about doing tons of business development. And the other people in the company were like, we got to go out and sell more projects. We got to sell projects. And I was kind of skeptical of that because it always seems like we always had plenty of work. So we wound up with this workflow where the principal of the company went down the entire list of projects that were open and estimated how much work he thought was left in a range because it was impossible to know it for certain, but he's looking for that 90% certainty window. So for game design project A, we've got somewhere between 5 and 10 hours left, and he just plugged all of those in. And then we also had information about the projects we've quoted but not yet started. And those all get quoted when they're originally quoted as a range. So that's possible to just do a whole spreadsheet full of math on all of that and find out how many uh, top to bottom, like the 90% certainty range, how many hours do we have left of work before we turn the lights off and go home? And that's a way that you kind of turn ranges into specific estimates and how you can make a dashboard out of something that is speculative in the future that you've got to estimate that you don't know about. All right. So for each metric, what is that number or range? What is the thing that you're actually tracking? And then related to that, what is either the baseline or the target? What are you looking for that to be? So like your revenue, maybe you want to be as big as possible, but that's kind of a cop out. You've got a budget, certainly. You should have a budget. I'm not the boss of you, but I think you should have a budget. Um, so you can take that budget and break it down by week to know what your revenue's got to be every week. And maybe you even do something more sophisticated than that by drawing a curve where your revenue is going to be higher in the holiday season than it's going to be in February. But for each one of those metrics, in addition to knowing what it is, you should know what you want it to be, which is part of your desert island scrap of paper so that you don't have to like be handed a thing that says we made $2 million this week, and then you've got to try to remember whether that's good or bad based on the costs of running your business. So the number, the baseline, and then you also want to know how that's moving over time. So it should be easy to look back and see in a chart or something like that, how was our revenue or whatever thing that we're tracking over time? Is this last week very, very different from history? Is this last week exactly on track with all the rest of it? So these are the things that I think that you're trying to keep track of in each case. For my money, nothing beats a Google Sheet for putting these things together. It's not hard to operate. You can easily share it with the other stakeholders in your company. You don't have to have any special skills to build it. There are tons and tons and tons of resources that you can use to learn more about building things into Google Sheets. You can plug all kinds of outside data sources into Google Sheets. Use something else if you want. as I've said before, I'm not the boss of you, but for my money, nothing beats a Google Sheet. So you should take those actual numbers and you should make them really, really big. The font size goes up arbitrarily high. Get it to the point where you've got a window that's got those six numbers in it and you can't possibly look away from them. Put the baselines right next to them so that you can like just look next to it and see if your revenue's meeting your target or your baseline or whatever. All of the historicals from previous weeks, put them in a table somewhere nearby, either on that same page or on other tabs in there, and then build yourself charts from that table data so you can very easily see how they have changed over time. This I think is kind of the baseline setup for how I'd suggest you do this. Um, Taking it a little bit step further, I would say definitely use exports from other tools to feed that data into there. So, for example, if you have a payroll service that keeps track of how many hours everybody is working, and you want to make sure that those are not climbing too high and you're paying all kinds of overtime, you should be able to export that out of Gusto and drop it into a tab in Google Sheets, and then have Google Sheets just go look into that data lake and pull out what was last week's thing. Now, the the dream is that you can set up live feeds from all of this data sources. I am not a fan of that, although if that's something you want to try, God bless you, and I hope that it works. Here are my observations. Those live feeds break all the time. Every time somebody updates their service or updates their API or Zapier changes, your entire dashboard falls apart. Um, Generally speaking, if you want access to those links, that costs you more money. You're paying for a Zapier subscription, or you're paying for a higher level um, of your like original data source in order to feed that stuff in. And I would love for this to be free. They're harder to build, so you're gonna wind up hiring um, software consultants to build that. If you can do it yourself, that's great. But those three things suggest to me that what I'd like to do in the past is just go to that tool, export it, drop it into Google Sheets. I think that it's valuable for you to understand how it works. And I also think that if you spend 15 or 20 minutes sort of hand rolling all of that data every week before you look at your dashboard, that process of going to those places and looking at it and putting it in yourself makes that more real. Like if you discover it for yourself, you are more likely to think that it's true for whatever reason, but that's my sort of observation. So I think that it's valuable to spend a little time. Should you spend 8 hours putting your dashboard together every week? Absolutely not. You've got better things to do. But spending a little bit of time doing that, I think, is a real benefit. I feel like weekly is the right frequency to do this. If you've got something that you've got to track every day, that's probably your job instead of the thing that you're trying to pay attention to. There might be stuff that you want to track every day, but I think that that is kind of outside the scope of this exercise. And if you're looking at it every month or every quarter, I think you are probably not getting fast enough feedback. So if you need to wait a month for your accountant to do last month's financials and then get you those by the 15th of the next month. Now you're 45 days out of date on what your expenses were last month. And I think you've probably got to do better than that if you want to, for example, keep costs under control. Um, let's see. I am interested in what some of you have in mind for your desert island numbers. Throw some of those into the chat. Like, what are some things that you are interested in knowing that you think are especially relevant to your business? Because then one of the things that we can talk about is like, how would you find the right data to plug that in to a Google Sheet that you can look at in a weekly meeting and know something useful about your business so that we can get you off to this desert island because I want to see you there. And while you guys are typing, I'm going to make sure that I did not miss anything. Yes, I like those. Those ACOS and ROAS are also easy to pull from the dashboard of wherever it is that you're doing your advertising. While we're waiting on that, here's some other things that let's see. We'll come back to this if you guys throw out stuff that's hard to figure out. I want to run through some. Yes, I want to return to milestones for game development because I think that that is a fantastic thing. I will talk about that right now. So, because I've done a lot of this over the past year, I've working at Chip Theory Games now. Just started a full-time job here about 3 weeks ago, but have been consulting here for the last 14 months on project management. Essentially, we do extremely large crowdfunding campaigns around here. So the Elder Scrolls 2 campaign, which closed a couple of months ago, crowdfunded something like 17 different SKUs, some of which contain 7 or 8 components, some of which are decks of cards that have somewhere between 8 and 60 cards in them. So I've spent a lot of time over the last 14 months thinking about how we can possibly get such huge projects to press on time. Whoops. Um, there is not much to do other than to build a gigantic project plan and then run it. So you got to pay attention to that every week. The project software the project management software that I've been using is called OmniPlan. It's from the Omni Group, which makes some fantastic Mac only, sadly, software. But you can, as with like every program that's worth using, it will kick out tons of like XML formatted or CSV or similar data that you can then again drop into your Google Sheet and just query to find out where you're at. So if you're able to build like even a relatively rudimentary set of milestones for game development, let's say take the very easiest version of that, where you've got 8 steps that you need to do in order to get your game out the door. So you're going to design it and play test it and hire art and edit it and whatever that set of steps is, and put a date on every one of those when you want to have it done. As soon as that data exists in that very short spreadsheet, you can easily query for today's date and figure out how many of those things are done. Like assuming that you have a checkbox where you can check them off, and then you can very easily look at that dashboard and see how many of those are overdue. That obviously is not extremely difficult to just look at that timeline if there's only 20 things on it. But the Elder Scrolls 2 campaign file that I'm looking at has about 1,000 different tasks in it. And so it is not easy at all to look at that and just get a sense of where it's at. So for a project like that, there's really a lot of benefit into writing some logic to distill that down and to find out how much stuff is overdue. That one will even calculate just inside the program how far overdue in terms of minutes, hours, days, and things like that. So it depends, on where your data is now and what exactly it is that you want to know about it. But the first way that you can get clear on that is by, again, just writing down a list of the things that you want to know with an eye towards, if I knew these things, would that dispel my worry so that I could focus on productive things instead of staying awake all night wondering if we're going to make payroll or whatever. All right. Good places that you can look for data that can kind of help solve some of this stuff. Your project management software, as we were just talking, is a great place to go for answers to questions about, are we possibly going to be able to release this thing on time? Your art tracking spreadsheet, if you are assigning art, especially if you are doing something like a TCG where there are dozens or hundreds of pieces of art, being able to track that stuff and is it done or is it not? How long was allocated for it? How much money were you going to pay for it? All of those questions are things that you can answer if you've got a spreadsheet that's got that information. You can jump into your accounting software to learn all kinds of financial metrics. And even if your software itself does not spit out the exact number you want, it is very easy to get that Google Sheets to do something. So your accounting software might or might not be able to easily kick you out a revenue divided by burn rate to tell you how much runway you've got. but you can easily get your revenue and you can easily get your expenses out of there, and you can just do the division yourself inside a spreadsheet. You'll get your Amazon dashboard for things. You can look at Board Game Geek for relevant metrics. If you're interested in finding out how the gaming public is receiving your game, obviously Board Game Geek's got just a straight up rating of that, but it can also be useful to know how many people are talking about your game on its talk page, how many people are uploading images, how many people are liking it. So Board Game Geek is a good place to go to look for data. Obviously, you can look for social media, and social media wants to provide you with all kinds of metrics to make it seem relevant. So I guess the only thing I would say about social media is that it might be wise to think more deeply than how many likes did I get or how many follows did I get. Because I think there's useful data in social media, but in the same way that Intuit is trying to sell you loans, Facebook is trying to sell you ads. And so the thing that they think that you should know is not necessarily the thing that you want to know. Your website analytics are a good place to look for useful dashboard numbers. Your shipping software could be. So if you are running UPS's ship software, or you are running Pirate Ship or something else, and you are looking for information about how efficient is my logistics operation, that is a place to go in order to find out things like that. Here are two completely non-obvious ones that I have used in the past that I really, really like. Um, in the past, when I have wanted to know if I am spending a sensible amount of time at the office, I just set my phone to hit a geofence and let me know when I was coming and going. So I didn't have to remember to clock in and clock out. I could just have that phone do it for me and then look back at a spreadsheet that it had created of how much time I spent there. You could use this if you're trying to spend more time at the office, or you could use this if you are concerned that you are spending too much time at the office and your quality of life is suffering. Obviously, if you are on your desert island, that was I in the office number should go to zero, and that should give you a great amount of satisfaction. One that I really, really like is your CPU's activity logs. I have used for years an application called Timing that just tracks what I'm doing on my computer all the time. I use that for billing clients for consulting work, but it's real useful for how much time did I spend today actually moving my business forward. Especially if you are in like writing or development parts of the business or something like that, it is very easy to imagine that you are moving the business forward by talking to your fans on Discord or reading the comments on Facebook posts and spending very little time actually writing game text or developing cards or doing layout or whatever. And your computer CPU will absolutely not lie to you about where that time is going. So an app like Timing, or there are other online apps for this, where you can go back and look at how much time did you actually spend doing these things, I think is really useful at having a completely dispassionate source kind of call bullshit on your best intentions that are hard to live up to. I really recommend that. And I guess I'll also put in a plug for that kind of dashboard item, something like how much time did our team spend developing games this week? If you do not develop games and you're in the game publishing business, something has gone wrong. All right. Um, Other non-obvious things that you can track. Um, you can get a sense of whether the team at your company is satisfied by circulating anonymous, I don't know, like 1 to 7 point um, surveys every week, maybe through your payroll platform. I had a friend who would ask all of his reports every week to rate their week on a scale of 0 to 7, where 3.5 of the points came from one thing and 3.5 of the points came from another thing. But if you're going to ask that question, you might as well write it down, and you might as well have a baseline, and you might as well track it over time, because whether your team is satisfied or not is probably very important to your business's success. You can keep track of the number of words that you wrote, keep track of the number of minutes that you play tested. If you believe, as I do, that being a healthy person is probably good for you, keep track of what you ate for lunch, or whether you meditated, or how long you ran on the treadmill. They don't seem very much like business statistics, I guess. But if you are, as I was, running a 1.15 person business, whether you are taking care of yourself is probably really, really, really relevant to whether your business is likely to be successful. So in addition to things that you can track, there's probably some things that you can estimate. So like if you just sit down every week and write down, was the team's communication inside my operation worth anything? Um, you could assign that a 1 to 100 point scale and just write that down every week. What do you think? This is probably something where the ranges are probably good in order to kind of keep you honest. You can estimate how many of your receivables are going to get paid or how many weeks it's going to take you yet to submit printer files, right? That one is probably similar to my client's process of going down and estimating how many hours are left to complete a given consulting project. So if you are week after week estimating how many weeks you have left to go to send a game to press, and that number never seems to be falling, that seems like a problem. Or if that is falling, 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 and it gets to zero, and you discover that your game is not actually ready to go to press, that also tells you something about your ability to estimate that accurately, which goes back to that fifth technique of estimating to compare your past estimates to the current actual situation. You can estimate what your wholesale numbers are going to be next week, all kinds of stuff like that. Three last bits, then we probably got some time for a little bit of Q&A. A bunch of the information in this presentation comes from three different places. I like books. I'm going to recommend you 2 books and 1 newsletter. The information about estimating that I talked about, those strategies basically come from a book called How to Measure Anything, which is, as it says, finding the value of intangibles in business. This book is all about trying to figure out things that it is very difficult to know by estimating them and then keeping track of them. Recommended. This one gets really mathy as it hits the middle and the end. So I am blessing you to give it up after the 4th or 5th chapter if you want, but I think that you'll find the first bits of it very useful. Second one is Traction. This is a kind of a general purpose business book for like small and medium sized businesses primarily. This one has a lot of information about building it. They call the dashboard a scorecard in this, but about the process of generating those numbers and looking at them every week, and then even more about how your leadership team should kind of discuss and think about those numbers and then solve the problems that are related to them. There's a lot more in this book about other ways that they think you ought to run your business. But this question of dashboards and scorecards is a part of it. Last one. I love this newsletter. This guy, Ben Collins, has a weekly newsletter that includes Google Sheets stuff, but then everyone ends with some new Google Sheets tip. And this keeps me learning new things about Google Sheets because there's always interesting stuff in here, but it also keeps the entire question on my mind. When you sign up, like the first 100 Sheets tips come in an ebook so you can get caught up with all kinds of other stuff. There's tons and tons of resources for Google Sheets, obviously, out on the internet, which is why I have not spent any part of this actually talking about how to do those things, because you can go out and find that on your own. But anyway, this is definitely recommended as well. I think we got a couple minutes left. I'm happy to do some Q&A or spitballing or whatever. But that is end of prepared slides. How are you guys doing? Anybody got any questions? I feel like I should be able to push a button and get the Jeopardy music. I can't hear you because you're muted, but there you go. There you go.
There it is. Jeopardy music incoming. Hey, that was a lot of fun, Jeff. It looks
Sam
like
Stockton writes, do you have any thoughts on measuring or predicting the success of a game before launch? I think that I do have thoughts on this. My first thought is I think it is devilishly difficult to do this, um, to perhaps the point of it being completely impossible. Um, that is not very satisfying, and I don't think that there is nothing that you can do, but I do think that it is extremely difficult to predict which games will break out, um, just based on experience seeing some games that I thought were fantastic and that everybody else thought were fantastic, like games that I showed to retailers and other designers, and that everyone at the companies that I was working at thought were just fantastic, and then like did not fail per se, but just did not live up to that. So I do think that there is an extent to which it really is a fool's errand to attempt to predict with great specificity what can succeed in the market. Now, that said, I think that it is very relevant to, like, as with that estimating technique of comparing things you don't know to things that you do or to things that have happened in the past, to take games that are similar to games that have come before, um, and assume that they will perform similarly. Now, I think that it's really important to, I think that it's very difficult to make those comparisons across publishers. So you can obviously prepare a game that is very, very similar to Magic the Gathering, and obviously it will not have Magic the Gathering success because of the time that it came out and because of the design and marketing power of Wizards of the Coast and factors like that. So, in addition to like the what does the game look like visually, what does the game play like, who is the publisher of that game, and what is their position in the marketplace and things like that. And you've got to even look, there are so many confounding questions about position in the marketplace. I'm really, really interested in, like a year ago, Amazon started putting how many copies of this game sold within the last month on, I think, nearly all of their listings. And games that I would have suspected were nearly dead routinely sell thousands of units per month. And so that kind of goes to the question of how hard it is to have insight into other people's businesses, especially when they're doing tons and tons of traffic through one marketplace that you don't have any insight into. So that's a very um, borderline useless answer to that question. I guess my key thought is that it is very, very hard, and that you should be extremely humble when attempting to make those predictions, and that you should not bet your house on it. Growing an evergreens a puzzler. I'm also, if you're going to be at Gamma Expo and you're interested in project management, I'm doing a seminar there on that. So if all of that stuff about building a 1,000 line Gantt chart about the Elder Scrolls is of any interest to you, look me up and come on down and we'll talk about building that stuff in Louisville.
That does sound fun. And space is limited, so they better get a seat as soon as they possibly can.
If I'm supposed to be able to hear you, it's not working.
Can you hear me now? Lindsay can hear me, but Jeff can't.
I mean, I think that looking at your playtest data is relevant. Um, yeah, I think that yes, yes. I think that if you make those the metrics, like those are at least things that you can control, right? Did it achieve X with our playtest group? I absolutely used that on a game that I like tried to cancel in development 3 different times, and I was like, this is not coming back with the playtester feedback numbers that I, based on my experience, know it takes for a game to succeed in the marketplace. So I'm going to pull the plug on this. And the designer was always like, well, back at it. And so he would design it again and again. And eventually we got to the place where those metrics did match what I wanted it to be. So although I didn't like have a formal dashboard for that, if I had, it would have made that set of decisions even more clear to me and even more clear to the designer. So neither one of us would have to be in this state of like, again, state of worry about, I don't know, is it going to succeed? Is it not going to succeed? If we can say we're tracking playtest feedback on a scale of 1 to 10, and we're not going to put it out until this game is at 8.5, like we can know what that is. Like I guess there's a danger that we will attempt to cook the books in order to push it out the door if that's what we're really trying to do. But yeah, I think that looking at those is relevant and smart. Did that more or less answer your question, Sam? Awesome.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I guess Lindsay can hear you. Maybe it's just me.
Sam, can you hear me? All right, I guess
I've been
it's just
forbidden
you,
to
Jeff.
listen to David.
So I am going to take this moment to say goodbye. Let me put it in the chat so Jeff can see it. This has been another episode, if there are no other questions, another episode of Boards and Bits. And we're looking forward to seeing Jeff at Gamma Expo as well. And I'm sure all of you will be there too. And if you've got any other questions, you can find him at Chip Theory Games. I'm David Abelson with Gamma Education, and thank you for your time today.